Hey there everyone, and welcome back to Europe in Detail. So in this episode we're taking our little Spain-based town a bit further, and we're really going to get stuck into some of the more difficult detailing. To be more specific, we're going to start detailing along the cliff edge just behind the Ponte Nevo bridge. This also includes some really cool points of interest that are pretty much built into the cliff, so that's a little bit later in the episode. So we are going to begin this episode by filling out a few more of the little wee blocks that I had left at the end of the last episode. It's nothing too major, to be honest. It's pretty much just this block and another little wee small one before we move on to the guts of the episode. But this gives us a good chance to have a view with this really nice lighting on the town, and I think it's looking great. It's got a really cool close-knit vibe, and that's exactly what we were going for here. So without further ado, let's get started here. The first thing I want to do is I want to change the shape of the river coming in here. The real Ronda, as you can see here, the river coming up and into the Ponte Nevo bridge is a bit of an S-bend shape, and my river's probably a little bit straight, so I want to do that before we do anything else. We are also going to fill out the remaining blocks of the town all the way up to the cliff edge as we move along, so we leave no spaces that I need to go back to. I'm also trying to set the terrain up somewhat on the opposite side of the Ponte Nevo bridge that we've built on, so that I can get it prepared for the building we're going to do in the coming episodes. Because the next thing I want to move on to is putting in these roads. Now I know these are going to get shifted around a bit as I build, but I really need to get these pretty much in the right place to begin with. Some of these roads might look familiar if you know Ronda or you're looking at it on Google Earth, but a lot of them have just come from my imagination and how I would imagine they would be. And plus I can't fit the actual roads from Ronda in here because I haven't followed Ronda perfectly. We are, however, going to include some very unique roads that you will see. It's worth noting that I may also change the road style in future, but for now these are all just the standard narrow alleyway. Actually I think it may be off steam, but in any case it's perfect for this little town for now. One thing that the town has sorely been lacking up to this point is a town square with a church or a town hall, and we're going to get stuck into one right now. I've tried to base this square off one that we actually see in Ronda. Admittedly it is quite a lot larger, but it looks to me like there's some form of underground parking underneath it here, which we're going to include. I absolutely love the idea of underground parking. Not only is it nice and cool for your car, but you get to hide this massive ugly car park completely out of view, and in this case we get to put a beautiful town square on top of it. So I put a real car park in here, sink it down, and then use surface networks to cover over it, and then we just put some really nice looking tiles and decals on top of that, and then I use invisible paths eventually so we can have citizens walking through the square. And once this is done, it's really cool to see cars and little scooters and stuff actually drive down and into the car park and park up. Next we put in this beautiful Spanish based church from Armesto. That's just Armesto quality, as you would expect. And then I put a handful of buildings on the corner here as well, following the contours of the road really tightly like we have been with the rest of the town. And to finish it off, I completely fill out the block next to it, add a really nice Mediterranean style tile to the square, and add a few bushes here and there for a bit of shade. So now we've filled out the blocks almost all the way up to the cliff, we can start working on the really cool stuff. And scouring over Google Earth here, there looks to be a pretty iconic looking restaurant or cafe that sits right at the base of the Ponte Nevo bridge here, or pardon me, not the base but right on the side here, and this looks to be very much cut into the side of the cliff. And because this is in such a magnificent spot, I mean the view of the bridge from here would be glorious, you know. I really had to include this. Now I've gone and made this a hell of a lot trickier for myself by wanting real citizens coming down and through this area. So what I end up having to do is actually fill out the whole block over to the road so that I can fit the pedestrian path that runs down here really neatly between the buildings. So before I get cute with any type of detailing, I want to make sure that works properly and have all of that in place so that I don't end up doing anything twice. Oh, now while I remember, I've also been messing with the LUT or the LUT, so I need you guys to give me some feedback or some input, because I've been going between Relight Bleak and Relight Neutral and I really can't decide. As you would imagine, the Bleak looks very colourless, but for some reason it just looks really good with this town, and the Relight Neutral is kind of the opposite. It's very colourful but still very realistic looking. In a perfect world, you would think the more colourful one would certainly suit a sunny Spain, but I am definitely not 100% convinced, so I need some input, guys. If you can tell where I change, let me know what you think and what you prefer. So just for reference, at the moment I'm pretty sure it's Bleak. Anyway, you'll see me finish up here the basic infrastructure for this area by putting in a block service at the end of the path to get the citizens down here. And now that's all working, we can start detailing with things like cliffs and fences, and putting these cliffs in alone really gives this a unique vibe. And aside from those cliffs, the rest of the area is just as you would imagine. A couple of little wee cafes slipped in here, lots of tables and chairs and umbrellas, there's a couple of really colourful awnings, and of course some beautiful trees to sit under with your nice coffee. So before I start filling out these blocks any further, I've got to mess with these roads a little bit with the node controller to smooth them out and add a slope to most of these intersections. As you can see here, these roads are sloping down over to the right of the screen, which are going down to another little bridge that we're going to hit up later in this episode. But because of that slope down towards the bridge, these houses are a lot more temperamental to put in. I've sloped these roads pretty much as I think I can realistically, which is going to be a challenge to put these buildings down, but like I mentioned at the start of the episode, I'm making a point to fill out these blocks as we go. And these particular blocks here that we're doing are pretty simple. These are mostly just residential apartments. There really isn't any connector roads or any roads around here that make sense to put any commercial on, so it's pretty straightforward. And once you see me fill out those inner blocks, I start to move over to the cliff edge, and over here I really want some mansions with big open backyards, lots of white plastered fences and pool areas, all overlooking this cliff. And because of the shape of the river here, the way that it S-bends to the right, these houses have a front and center view of the Ponte Nevo bridge. And these houses here are indeed based off the ones in real life Ronda as well. And because of that, I really want to add some detail to these. So let's zoom in a little bit closer and make these really come to life. With these houses now in place right up against the edge of the cliff here, it really does give me some perspective on just how large this drop is down into the river. Now I haven't scaled this 100%, but I think this is pretty close, and my word, you certainly wouldn't want to have too many wines around the pool, because that would be a horrible death. But what I've tried to do down here is scatter these houses so that they look somewhat random and organic, and then just made this sort of white wall to look like a concrete plastered wall, and made these retaining walls between the buildings. This really gives off a nice Spanish vibe, and I was really happy with how this came out. It also gives us clear boundaries between these properties, which is important moving forward because each yard is going to be detailed differently. There's definitely some things that remain the same amongst all the yards, like pools and different paving and cobblestones and stuff like that. Things like gardens and flowers, But I am trying to introduce quite a fair bit of variety, so none of those two pools will be the same and none of the gardens will be the same and things like that. And even though we don't have real citizens coming down into this particular part, I still want to give all of these yards clear access. Some of the access might be through other houses that are adjoined, being wall to wall. Others might have separate stairways and pathways down the sides of the houses and things like that. Now that all the houses are detailed and all looking pretty good, I can finish this off by putting the cliff in with some rocks and stuff, the same way we've been doing with the rest of the town. So looking at this cliff here in real life from Rhondda, this changes a little bit from what we've been doing so far. It looks as though there's been a lot of water erosion here. I could be wrong, I'm not a geologist, but there looks to be very deep canyons or ruts cut into the side of the cliff here that run all the way from the top to the bottom, so I am definitely going to try and create my cliffs to incorporate that somewhat. I'm only using two types of rocks here and they're both grey flames ones in that Adrid colour that we've been using, but the reason I'm only using two is because I want them to have similar textures. I'm just spinning them around and being very tricky with them so that they don't look like the same rocks. But I do find that if we use too many different rocks, even if they're the same type or colour, it loses that monolithic look that we're going for with a cliff. And that may sound like complete nonsense, but I think it's pretty important to stay true to what we can see of things like Google Earth. So to finish off these cliffs, I use another of Grey Flames rocks. It's the mossy one this time, and put it around the top edge to bring that grass right in, and also a little bit down the bottom where it meets the stream. And then we top the whole thing off with a bit of scrub here and there. For this next part that I move on to, I'm using inspiration from an actual place in Rhondda here as well, although this is not following it exactly. But when we have a look at Google Earth, you'll see this is exactly why I've included it. Look how cool this place looks. There's all these different little walkways and really unique private and secluded areas here as well, under some really nice trees. And again, I've gone and made it bloody hard for myself by wanting real citizens walking around here. So you'll see me put in a path and then we build around that. As you can see here, most of the work is in this path. It's got a retaining wall and some stairs in the appropriate places. And aside from that, it's got some really nice gardens around it and this main building here. Maybe this is a museum or some sort of information place where you can come in and get some information about the area and maybe its history. And I also place a handful of buildings off the back of that building as well. So I think the thing I like about this area the most is it really is a nature walk in every sense of the word. There's no pavement anywhere. I've tried to make it look like it's all dirt and maybe the stairs are made out of wood. And for being maybe only 10 minutes walk out of the centre of town, this is a really neat little area. And I can't wait to see some real citizens coming down here and hanging out. So the next thing we move on to is another piece that I'm taking inspiration directly from Rhondda from, and this looks like an iconic piece of road. A very steep, looks very old, and judging by Google Earth, if you've got anything other than Mr. Bean's Mini, you are going to get stuck, man, or it's going to be really hard to drive on this road. It is very narrow and very, very twisty. Do you guys know Mr. Bean, or am I showing my age, man? I don't really know where to go from there. Anyway, the first thing I do here is get the road into position, and I'm using good old no controller again to smooth out this hairpin and make sure that this road is somewhat realistic in its slope and its layout. Once I'm happy with that, we can start detailing it, and it starts obviously with these big stone retaining walls. I've found one that I think looks appropriate. I'm not 100% happy with it, but like I said, I think it looks pretty good, and I've tried my best not to make them look exactly the same. So one of them's a little bit older than the other. It's got a bit more foliage and vegetation growing up it, and another one next to that is a bit more square. There's also a handful of the Spanish style buildings that go in on the very apex of this corner, and then up towards the next 90-degree corner we've got a very iconic house right off the corner, the outside of the corner, and then on the inside I've tried to put like a little community hall, like a town hall for the village that was here originally or something, and then further up the road I put a church in, but we're going to visit this a little bit closer in a coming episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning into the episode. We're up to number 22 already, which is pretty mind-blowing. If you guys have been enjoying the series, or if you've been crazy enough to watch it since episode 1, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Otherwise, chuck me a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it, and I will see you guys on the next episode. Look after yourselves and look after each other, guys. See you later.